The following is a special presentation of the PDF Sports Network.
You know, I'm right. The podcast that uncovers the origin stories of some of the biggest names in sports, media, and entertainment. Nick Durst here along with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, I'm really excited for our guest today. He is the only person to work with Skip Bayless, Stephen A. Smith, and Jay Mariotti on a regular basis.
He's most well known for being a longtime sports columnist in Colorado. He's worked at various newspapers throughout his career. Also, he's a legend, a true living legend. As you and I know, we grew up, one of those shows that we used to watch when we were younger, Around the Horn on ESPN. One of the greatest panelists to ever do it, one of the most all-time winningest panelists to ever do it, and by our estimation, one of the most entertaining people to have ever been associated with the show and ESPN. So we're so happy to have him on. Thank you for doing this with us. Woody Paige. Woody, welcome. How are you? Nice to see you. Welcome to You Know I'm Right.
Hello, Joe and Nick. When we started Around the Horn, I asked ESPN, I said, who's going to watch this show? And they said, office and high school and college kids. And they're right. And people in bars, and you grew up watching it probably after high school or after school or while you were in college. A lot of guys watch it there. So turned out they were absolutely right. Normal people don't watch Around the Horn or pardon interruption. It's got to be crazy people. So.
No, we did. And Tony Reality, big Staten Island guy.
I noticed in my research that you guys are, at least I think Nick's in Staten Island, and I went, oh God, another one of those Staten Islanders. The only time I've been out there, I covered Ground Zero when the crashes happened, and the newspaper sent me to New York. And they were taking all of the steel and garbage and human remains out to fresh kills.
Yeah.
And I went out there. And that was probably just a great way to start the show with a serious story. I went out there and I talked to a cop who actually spent a lot of time in Colorado, and I was wearing Colorado Rockies baseball cap. And I said, have you recovered anything unusual? He was among the police authorities there that were going through all of the stuff that was being barged out there in the trucks, taking it. And he said, sure, we got wallets and we got all sorts of papers from the buildings. And he said, I got a watch with the time on it exactly when the plane hit. And I said, oh, could I see that? And he went into God, this is terrible. I apologize for this, but it hit me. So now he goes into a trailer that's a cool air-conditioned trailer. And he comes out with a box, and he opens the box, and there's the watch with the exact time of the crashes, and it's on an arm. How's that to start the program?
No, it's okay. It's hopefully you could come back to New York and visit us someday. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm here will be.
So when I that in my entire career, which spans from the 1960s, so that's 60 something years that I've been doing. I'm 76, and I started this when I was 16, so that's 61 years, I guess. I've never had a period of time like the week after 9/11. Now let's talk about fun things. I did give you funny line, I think, about who was going to watch around the horn, and it turned out to be true. And it was. I sent Nick a thing that I worked with Stephen A. Smith on a show called Dream Job. I don't know if you got a chance to see that, but that was the ESPN's only attempt, I think, to try to do American Idol or reality show or The Voice or something like that. And whoever won that show, we did, I think, 4 seasons. Whoever won that show got to be an anchor person on ESPN, and it got a Mustang convertible and $95,000. And so Stephen A. Smith and I were judges on that show, and there was a lot of talent that actually came through that, guys that are still on TV. But at one point, we were judging the finalists one season, and 2 things happened. Stephen A. Smith told one of the guys, they were 2 young men, he said, I got to tell you the truth. And you have to put this in Stephen A. Smith's voice. At the end of the day, the bottom line is what you bring to the table is just too many cliches.
That's funny, Joe. I wanted to bring back Dream Job so I could win. And
Yeah, I know. We need to find Nick so Nick does like freelance broadcasting, so we need to find him a good, better concrete job here soon.
So I told one of the guys who actually ended up winning, I said, you were rock solid. Tonight you were rock solid. You managed to get past the mistakes, you managed to do the interview great, you did it. And I said, best performance of the entire season, rock solid. And I turned to the other guy and I said, you know what? You were rock hard. And the host of the show, who was a late, great personality for ESPN, fell on the floor because I couldn't think of another word for rock, like rock good or whatever. And it was live. I worked with ESPN with Stephen A. Smith. I worked with Skip Bayless on First Take, First and 10. We started that, and anybody that has ever watched Skip, I apologize. And we had actually auditioned about 300 people to be my partner on that morning show.
Cold pizza.
Yeah. And we had gone through rap artists, former NFL quarterbacks, disc jockeys around the country. And I must tell you, I would guess 90% of them were African Americans because they were kind of recreating the pardon interruption dynamic, I guess, a white guy and a black guy. And that was the same period of time as the Olympics in Athens, Greece. And I went to the Olympics, and I had picked out somebody I wanted to work with, and that was part of my agreement that I could choose my partner. And when I came back, they said, we're going to try Skip Bayless. And I went, really? That's 2 old white guys. That's really what you're going for? And it actually worked a bit until I think the end of that relationship was we would have meetings in the morning to determine what was going to be on the show that day. We do that for Around the Horn. We go through 12, 14 subjects and figure out what are the best subjects. They don't tell us what to say. We just decide on what topics, like you guys do the same thing. You go, what do we want to talk about? And there was a great, funny survey taken by Golf Magazine that said 38% of male golfers would give up sex for a year if they could break 80. and the producer said to me, would you give up sex for a year to shoot par? And I said, of course I would. I said, there've been probably 20 years I've had to give up sex for a year. They turned to Skip Bayless, there's a room, there's about 10 people in there, producers, directors, assistants, production assistants. Would you give up golf for a year to improve your golf game? And he said, I've had more sex than everybody together in this room. That wasn't even the answer to the question. That wasn't the question.
Woody,
And-
wasn't cold pizza like the target demographic was females? So weren't they I guess they thought you guys were two hunks. Maybe that's what led to the success.
What the target audience was to steal people from Today and CBS This Morning, and you see they wanted to just kind of slice into those morning shows, so they felt like the dimension of sports, and they added with that news and interviews. We had a lot of rock stars and bands and celebrities on the show, and so I would guess it was about 70% sports, and they hired someone from one of the morning shows on the network to be the producer of the show. So anyway, that was the pregame discussion on the air. They asked me the question, would you give up golf for a year? And I said, yeah, same question. Yeah, I've given up golf for that. Yeah, I would do that to shoot at 75. And they turned to Skip and said, would you give up golf? And he said, I've had a lot more sex than Woody. I got up out of my chair and went around and tried my best to choke him. And he's Skip, and I know he's still doing this. Skip was in great shape. I mean, he worked out. He sat on a stationary bike and watched sports 24 hours a day. He spent about 20 hours a day on a bar stool. So I wasn't working out. And so we got in a fight on live TV that spilled out onto 8th Avenue. We were about a block from Madison Square Garden. We were right there by Empire State Building. And we were out on the street, kind of, and I could hear in my IFB that the producer was saying to the cameraman, keep getting it, keep pushing it, get as much of it as you can. And I thought, well, that's kind of the end of this, how this one's going to be. And he and Stephen A. Smith ended up together. And it's kind of funny how all of this kind of really works together. Jay Mariotti used to be a columnist in Denver, and I was his boss. I was a sports editor, and he had come from the other newspaper across the street to work for us. And I didn't like him very much, but that didn't bother me. But he left to go to the national newspaper, which had a short life. And I said, let's go outside and tell everybody you're leaving. All these are true stories. At the Denver Post, I was a sports editor and a columnist. And I went out and I said, people, Jay Mariotti's leaving. My work is done here. I've accomplished all I could. And then he left. Every time I saw him at a sports event, I'd say, hi, Jay, and he'd say, fuck you. And that went on for like 3 years. That is true. That's all he would say. And I would always say, people liked following me around when they saw Mariotti coming because they knew this was going to happen. I go, hey, Jay, how you doing? So when they started Around the Horn, they said, how do you feel about if we bring Jay Mariotti over there? Well, he's not going to like me because I was the first guy they chose for Around the Horn. We met at Carnegie Deli in New York, and it was Bob Ryan, Tim Calishaw, guys who were originals on Around the Horn, Jay Mariotti, Max Kellerman, the producer of the show, directors. And so I sat down at the table, and Mariotti was about 2 feet away. And I said, hi, Jay. And I know what he's going to say to me. I said, hi, Jay. And he said, hi, Woody, how you doing? And I went, oh, he's changed because of the show. But we had a battle on Around the Horn. We were antagonists for several years till he got into some trouble.
Yeah, so
that goes from 9/11 to Jay Mariotti.
we have Mariotti on the show, and he's always quick to note that despite the fact that he hasn't been on Around the Horn in over a decade, he's still top 5 all-time wins. You, of course, are at the top of the list. I don't know if anyone's going to be passing Mariotti anytime soon to crack into the top 5. So he's very impressed by that. But you're going to be untouchable, Woody, at the top of the leaderboard.
I don't know what that accomplishes, actually. What's that worth? Nobody's going to. I think and I am modest. I'm modest on the show, and my personality is not much different. But I think what people will always remember is the blackboard, and that's kind of a sad state about me as a journalist for 60 years. That the blackboard that's behind me with these cute puns or quotes or whatever it is, that will be remembered. And I thought, and I'll tell you some things today that you don't care about, but I've really never talked about, is I assumed after 10 or 15, I didn't think the show, let me back up. I didn't think the show would last longer than 13 weeks. When they put it together, I just felt like it didn't have the chemistry or the concept that would really work. And that's why I asked them, who's going to watch this show? And in a book that's about ESPN, Tim Cowshaw said everybody that they'd put together, I think it was 5 or 6 people, they felt like all of them belonged and I didn't belong. That because I was Soupy Sales, and you have to go back in history. He had an afternoon show for kids that was really for adults out of Cleveland and Detroit, and then it was national. And I was kind of copying Soupy Sales' concept of just being silly. And Tim Cowshaw told the guys who wrote that book, these guys are having all the fun. He said, Paige didn't belong. And he said, after the show was on on TV for 2 weeks, they felt like Woody Paige was the show, that they all had to develop personalities. The belief was it was going to be like a daily sports reporters. For anybody that's your age or older will remember on Sunday mornings, there was a serious sports topic show. It included Bob Ryan and several other sports writers. And that's what Mariotti thought it was going to be. We were doing a daily, really serious, when the producer of the show, Max Kellerman, who came to be one of my best friends in life, droned on about New York and the Yankees and boxing in New York and Madison Square Garden. And we're sitting in the deli and he's just going on. And I finally said, Max, you apparently have me confused with somebody who gives a fuck what you think. And the producer said, that's the show. And so I think the other guys got that it was supposed to be, the idea of the show was like 2 guys sitting at a bar yelling at each other about the sports outcome or a game that's in present. So that was basically because they told me, I met with the ESPN executives at the Super Bowl. I said, what is the show going to be? And they said, sort of like Hollywood Squares, and you'll be the Met Center Square. And I went, really? And so I didn't think it was going to last very long, but I thought we got past a lot of criticism early on, and it caught on because people like, pardon the interruption, they love Tony and Michael. And then they kind of figured out what we were. And I thought, well, it's going to last for a while. And somebody else will come along and I'll pass along the quote board, the blackboard, with just my idea of anything. And I keep waiting for somebody who's going to come along. I thought I'd be gone like 10 years ago. And nobody's going to come. Nobody wants to do it. My associate knows that some of those blackboard quotes are written under performance enhancing stuff.
Woody, how'd you come up with the idea for the blackboard? And is it tough at this point on the show to be picking new quotes all the time?
It's tough. I was in New York working on Cold Pizza. I was working on Dream Job. I was doing Disney. kids Disney Channel. I didn't realize when I agreed to go to New York that they were going to use me on 14 shows a day. I was like, who's the guy from New York that was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? He did the show in the
Regis
morning.
Philbin?
I talked once because he was a big Notre Dame fan, and I saw him on the street, and he said, "You're on TV more than I am." And Regis was on the Tonight Show, like because Skip and I would tape two shows that would appear later, and Cold Pizza was on 2 hours live and then repeated 2 more hours, and I was that I was on television like 6 hours a day, and I thought, this is ridiculous. I don't want to see me 6 hours. Why would anybody else want to see me? But my assistant then and I were walking down the street, and the studio that I had in New York City was in the New Yorker Hotel. If you're familiar with that, that's where we were taping shows. And I said to him, "We got nothing in the background. Like, I have nothing in the background here. This is my office." And he said, "What do you want to put back there?" And I said, all these shows have footballs in the back. They'll have Jets footballs or helmets. And I said, "We're going to have something else. What do you think about it?" I said, "Maybe a blackboard, and I'll just put something on it like, 'You suck, Mariotti.'" And our first blackboard came from Toys R Us, and it had plastic letters, and you could put them on the board. And we had just enough letters to say Mariotti sucks or something like that. And then we got another blackboard that he could use chalk on. So this goes back to 2003. And I told him, I said, "Let's get a blackboard that we can use chalk on and actually use more than three E's." And he brought that in, and I just wrote a few quotes, and I got a call from the vice president of ESPN saying, "Lose the blackboard. That's not ESPN. That's like we're a kid show or something." And I went, "Okay, all right." A week later, he called back and he said, I guess I shouldn't say the fuck word, but he said, "Put the fucking blackboard up." And I said, "Really?" I said, "You got so many calls from Nick and Joe and everybody else out there saying, 'Oh, we love the blackboard.'" He said, "The president of the network liked the blackboard." It went back up. It was off the air. Nobody knows that story, but it was off the air for a week, and I went, "That's okay. I will put a football up there behind me." And so then the blackboard had one other problem. The same assistant, one day, he put on the blackboard. I would say them, but he'd come up with one every once in a while. He said, "If you don't like my performance, call 1-800-347-HORN." And the producer of the show called me that afternoon and said, "The blackboard is finished. You may be finished." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "If you call that number, it's an escort service." And so on the show, you called to get a prostitute with the blackboard. And he said, "Take the blackboard away." And the next day I got a call saying, "Put the blackboard back up." So they just sort of put it. I actually tell them, we show them before the show starts what the blackboards are. And I say to the producers and directors and everything, "If you don't like this one, you better tell me right away, because it's about to be on the air." And the other panelists can't see it. So I make fun of them, because the way the boxes are on that show, they don't watch me when I'm talking. They're looking at notes or on their cell phone or whatever it is. And so reality and the other panelists don't really know what's on the blackboard. So I can make fun of all of them. And they see it later on, and I'll hear from Sarah Spain later on about, what was that blackboard about? Mariotti used to complain about them all the time. But I would guess of several 100,000 people I hear from, that the blackboard is generally appreciated or accepted for being what it is. Just my idea of something we'll have some fun with. And so when do I do them? Occasionally I do them at bars on bar napkins. And I would guess out of 10 that I come up with, we use like 2 or 3. A lot of them are not. I did a book of, there's a book on Amazon you can buy it. It has about 2,000 of them in it. And that was a bestseller for a while. And I've been asked to do it again, but I don't know. I guess I've done 5,000. I guess that's my only accomplishment in life, guy. And that should end all your questions.
Well, listen, you said it yourself. You've been in this business for 60 years, right? You're not gonna stay in this business for 60 years unless you have some personality to you. Now, we could walk you through your career from the Whitehaven Press, wanting to be a journalist in high school, the University of Tennessee, your early days writing for the Knoxville Journal, the Commercial Appeal of Memphis, the Rocky Mountain News, the Denver Post, the Gazette. Now, you turned what primarily started as a writing career, and you made a transition into TV and broadcasting, and you were on part of one of the most successful entities that has ever existed at ESPN, right? So you're not going to have all that success unless you have talent and you're a great storyteller and you're entertaining, right? So what would be the best piece of advice to somebody who is looking to do that right now?
To a lot of colleges. And so I was a poor kid in this house. I grew up in government housing, Goldfield Sadler. Grew up in the housing project where Elvis Presley. If anybody saw the Elvis movie, they show him as a kid at Lauderdale Courts, and that's where we lived. And I used to listen to him when I was a little kid, singing and playing the guitar. And my mother said he'd never amount to anything. She said, "Why are you hanging out with that kid?" And Elvis and I were friends throughout our lives. And so I don't think there was much promise for me to be, well, I mean, it turned out okay for Elvis, so I guess I turned out okay. But I speak at all of these colleges, and that question, of course, comes up all the time. And I put a lot of thought into it years ago, but in terms of how did I keep a job for all this long or become somewhat successful, it boils down to 3 or 4 things. Number one, work harder than everybody. And I think when I was in high school and college, in terms of journalism, I was a worse student. I won the most distinguished Tennessee Alumni Award, and Peyton Manning found out he had won it the year before. That's pretty good company to be in, Peyton Manning, and then you win this award. And Peyton said to me at practice, "You won that award?" Yeah. It was a question, not like a statement. And he said, "I'm giving mine back. If they give it to you, it must be worthless." Well, he was right. And he used to, after a game, Peyton Manning would win a game, and I'd go in the locker room and I'd walk over by him, and nobody would ask him questions until he changed out of his uniform into civilian clothes. And I'd walk by and I'd hear, Woody, and it was Peyton. And I thought, well, he's going to tell me some kind of scoop or something. I come over and he said, "You should be the athletic director at Tennessee." And then he turned me. That's the kind of conversations. Once he said, "Get the ESPN plane and we'll fly to the Tennessee-Alabama game." I said, "They're not going to give me the ESPN plane. You are Peyton Manning. You are Peyton fucking Manning. You get us a plane and you fly us there." And he said, "No, but you can stay in my hotel in Knoxville." And we'd have that conversation. People come over and said, "What sort of inside information did he give you?" We talked about Tennessee a lot. Anyway, when I speak at colleges, I tell them, I try to figure out how this all worked. Look, not a lot of skill. On radio, you're called a personality. You know that. They'll go, "Howard Stern, he's a radio personality." On TV, you're called a talent. And I thought, I have no personality. I have no talent. I don't belong on radio. I don't belong on television. I worked harder than everybody else. Not as a student, but in college as the editor of the high school, of the college daily newspaper in Tennessee. I worked hard I was doing a midnight to 6 radio show on a station there called Woody Wake Up, and I know nobody was listening to it because I would have a record that would skip for like 19 minutes and nobody called and complained. And I'd go out to breakfast and leave the record on and it'd just play over and over again. And I'd get breakfast and come back. And I think the only girls that were having overnight parties were probably listening to the music in the background. And I worked for the newspaper, the daily newspaper in Knoxville, Knoxville Journal. And I had a TV show on the campus news. I worked very hard at what I wanted to do in life. If you work harder, you guys are doing a podcast. If you work hard at this podcast, it's probably better than, how many podcasts do you think there are about sports? Probably 5,000. Just, I don't know. If you work harder than those other 5,000, you're going to be in the top 20% success rate. That's what I did. This is my advice to everybody out there. You want to be successful in broadcasting, journalism, ESPN, car, automobile business, whatever it is. If you work harder in school and college and your life than everybody else, you rise to the top 20%. If you're more passionate, I once asked a psychiatrist, I said, why is it that I actually am successful? And he said, you're more passionate than anybody. You love what you're doing. Most people, in what he told me, he said, and I'm not putting anybody down with this, but he said, a guy collecting garbage is not passionate about what he's doing. He collects garbage, he puts it on his truck and moves on. So that's it. Number two is if you're more passionate than anybody else about what you're doing, you pass another 10% of the people. And a third is creativity. So if you're passionate about the podcast you're doing, you're working hard at it to get people that are really good. I saw the list of people you've had come on the show. You work hard at that. You work hard at putting on a good show. You're passionate, that you're excited about doing this every week. I assume you're doing it once a week, maybe more. You're passionate about it. You love it. You want to do it. You'd probably want to do it 3 times a day if you could. If somebody would pay you, you'd do it 3 times a day. The third thing is to be creative. What does that mean? A blackboard. Yeah, a blackboard is creative. You can laugh and you're smiling at that, and that sounds stupid. Creativity is, in college, when they took a male dormitory at Tennessee and moved the men out and put the women in that dormitory. And our journalism professor told us to do a story on the women moving into the men's dormitory. Everybody in my class, or the 40 other people that did this paper or the story, wrote about the women and do you like the lobby and the plants and stuff like that. I went and interviewed female students about what were they doing with the urinals. Seemed to me an odd story that they go into the bathroom in the dormitory and there would be urinals everywhere. And they told me that they watch their hose and underwear in the urinals, and that they actually had peeing contests in the urinals and 2 or 3 other things that they were doing. I turned it in, and the professor gave me an F, and everybody who did the normal stuff got an A. I sent that to a national collegiate writing contest, and I won because it was creative. 30 people did the same story, and I did the different story. Now, it may have been silly, and it might have been off the wall, but it was different. When I've been to 40-something Super Bowls, and guys would come up to me as writers and say, "What are you writing this year?" I went to a nudist colony in Florida and asked who they were cheering for in the game, because they weren't wearing any clothes. It wasn't like they had on a Mets cap or Jets sweatshirt. And Rick Rowley, who was writing the back column for Sports Illustrated, said, "What are you doing this week?" I said, "I'm going to a news column." Why? I said, "Nobody else is." They went on the day of the Tuesday interviews with the players. You got 10,000 people asking the same questions to those guys. I went to a news colony. I went to a leper colony. I tried out for Jeopardy on that day in Los Angeles. And in Phoenix, Arizona, the local columnist there said to me, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm going out to interview a medicine man at a reservation, one of the Native Americans." And I went out, true story, went out and I found their leader. He was what was called the medicine man. And I said to him, "You keep up with football?" And he said, "Oh, yeah. And we're kind of sitting around and probably smoking something that's illegal in 32 states. And I said, it was the Cowboys and the Steelers were playing in that Super Bowl. And I said, "So you're going to watch the Super Bowl?" "Oh, sure. Yeah." I said, "What team are you pulling for?" And he said, "The Cowboys." And I said, "An Indian pulling for the Cowboys?" That wouldn't make sense. And I'm thinking, this is going well. So I said, "What do you think the score's going to be?" Cowboys 28. I said, "Did you read the league? Did you talk to the world? Did you go up in the mountains for 3 days and contemplate?" He said, "No, I watched ESPN." And it came back and I wrote this column about the medicine man pulling for the Cowboys. The Phoenix paper ran my column on the front page, and the guy who was their columnist was on the sports page, and he came to me and he said, "I should have gone with you. I should have done." I'm not trying to impress you with my ability. I just try to always think of the story that everybody else is not doing. That was true in college. That was true in high school. It's true to this day. I did a story this week. John Elway left the Broncos after 40 years, and nobody had interviewed him. I mean, this is one of the greatest top 10, maybe top 5 quarterbacks of all time. I called the golf course where he was. I knew that he was in Palm Springs, and he was in the bar, and we talked, and I did a column with him, and I thought he was at peace with himself, and I also thought that he was about as truthful as he's ever been. And I said, "Let's do your top 7 memories." And he said, and he kind of chuckled, and I said, "Of course, that's because your number." And he said to me, "The number I wanted was 11. He said, "I was 11 in high school. And when I went to Stanford, I asked for number 11, and an older player had that number and wouldn't give it to me." So John Elway is the most famous with Mickey Mantle. Those are the 2 most famous 7s in the history of sports. He didn't want 7. He wanted 11. 7 was his second choice. And it was basically based on 7-Eleven, the convenience store. He went, well, sounded like 11-7, 7-Eleven. I found it funny that nobody else, just John Elway had 40 years with the Broncos. Second most Super Bowl appearances by a quarterback. Brady, of course, number 1. And I'm just a goof columnist, and I found him and interviewed him. Got 9 grandkids, stuff that he hasn't talked about. And I did that last Sunday for Easter Sunday, which seemed kind of appropriate. I don't know why, but and still nobody's been able to find him. Nobody thought maybe to call the golf course where he might be playing golf. That didn't, again, that's not me, but that answers your question. I've always, Bob Knight, who's been sick lately, and I got along. He used to come to, when he was coaching in Indiana, he would come to Colorado to hunt and fish. And I knew a guy who hunted and fished with, and Bob would talk to me. And he would call me. And he said to me, most people learn to read and write when they're in the second grade, and they go on to more important things. I never went on to more important things. I read and I write. I write books, I read books, and I work hard, I'm passionate, and I'm creative. That's the advice. If you do that, you're now in the top 10 percentile. That doesn't put me in the, I don't know what group that is, but I think that puts you beyond most everybody else in life, no matter what you choose. I do tell people, particularly lately, that there was no vision in my mind that there would ever be anything like Around the Horn. I asked Dikembe Mutombo once that when he was growing up in Africa, I said, "Did you dream of being an NBA player?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I couldn't dream beyond the end of the dirt road." And I thought that made sense. He didn't know there was such a thing as basketball. He played soccer when he grew old. He didn't know about basketball till he kind of left and went to big cities. I didn't know. Who knew there was going to be Around the Horn? You guys, 10 years ago, when you were watching Around the Horn, there was no such thing as a podcast. You couldn't dream of having a successful podcast. What I tell students now, or young people, or guys like you, dream of what doesn't exist. YouTube didn't exist. If I were a young man, I would be thinking of what is next beyond this podcast. What is the next big thing beyond a YouTube channel, a podcast? I don't know what it is. I'm too tired and old to know. But you two guys, Joe, Nick, you'll be doing something in 2 years that you didn't even know existed. You didn't know there was going to be a podcast, and you woke up one day and went, "Oh, let's do a podcast." I woke up one day and said, "Oh, I think I'll be on radio." I grew up listening to radio talk shows from Cleveland in Memphis, Tennessee, and I could pick up this station, and there was a guy named Joe Franklin who would talk to kids who would call him and ask questions, and he'd go do your homework, go to bed, kid. And he was a Howard Stern type before Howard Stern. And that's what I kind of thought, maybe I can do that. Maybe I could do talk radio someday. That's all I could dream of. Dikembe Mutombo could only dream of maybe playing soccer, but he was 7 feet tall. He could never dream of this. I couldn't dream of a blackboard. You couldn't dream when you were 15 years old of a podcast. So people need to dream, but don't dream of what you think that Alexander Graham Bell woke up one day and said, "Here's an idea, a telephone." Well, that's what I tell college students, dream of the next thing. What podcasts are going to evolve into something beyond that? I'm being too serious. You'd rather me be silly. Go ahead.
No, it's all good. You've accomplished so much in your career. You did the big expose, we'll say, on Invesco Mile High. You got sued there. You are a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame committee, Baseball Hall of Fame voter. So what are just some of the favorite events or type of stories that you've gotten to do over the years?
I got to be really good friends with Judy Serving, and we were both the same age. And he was in the ABA. I was covering the ABA, and I just talked to him, and he just come into the league, and I talked to him in the room, in the locker room, and we kind of fit. I asked him about his name, and he told me a great story that his mother he had a single mother, and when she gave birth, the nurse said, it was his birthday. You look it up. Is George Washington's birthday. You should name your kid George Washington Irving. And Judy's mother said, "You name your kid George Washington Smith. I'm naming my kid Julius Irving." And I thought that was I thought that was a really good story of why he was Dr. J. he would have been Dr. GW if she had named him George Washington. And he said, that was a really good question. And we got to be close friends. And I went, this is me and Julius. Now people say, oh, he's bragging about it. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that was just me saying, how you doing, kid? I like your game. The thing with the stadium in Denver is a lucky story. I was invited by my ex-girlfriend to come to the opening of a Mexican restaurant. And she said, would you do me a favor? I was pretty well known at that time. In Denver. Could you stop by, say hello to the owner? That's it, here, I'll do it for you. Went there, valet parked my car, went in, said hello, was leaving. I think I had a margarita and maybe a couple of tacos or something. I was leaving. A guy came down the street who was obviously drunk. It was around happy hour time. And he said to my ex-girlfriend, I could tell he was hitting on her, which didn't bother me. We were no longer together. And she said, this is Woody Paige. He said his name. And he said, I'm executive vice president of whatever the name of that company. What is the name of that company?
Invesco.
Which had got into a lot of trouble. They're now back. They were doing college basketball. They got in really deep trouble, went bankrupt. Anyway, he said, I'm executive vice president of Invesco. And I said, you probably don't want to talk to me. I don't like your stadium name. He said, we don't like it either. And my ex-girlfriend said to him, back it up, back up. You don't want to talk to Woody about this. And he said, oh, yeah. And I could tell he was bragging. He said, we hate it. We call it by a name that's kind of funny. And it was named after a woman's birth device. And she's saying to him, don't tell him about this. And he said, I don't care that he knows. We kid about it. The president is an idiot for doing this, but true story. So I leave. I go write that that I wanted it to be Mile High Stadium, like the original one. That's a great name, like Yankee Stadium, Shea Stadium. Yeah, go through the great names that now have corporate names on them. I didn't want it to be Invesco Field. I wanted it to be Mile High Stadium. So I wrote this thing saying, they agree with us. The people that work for Invesco think it's the worst name in the whole world. I got on a plane and went to Wimbledon to cover the tennis tournament and the British Open. I get a call from the paper saying we're being sued for $2 billion by Invesco, that you made that up. And I went, what? Yeah, shorten the story. He had given me his card. I wouldn't have remembered his name, but he gave me his actual card and it said executive vice president. When I left to go to London on the flight, I put it on my desk at home. And the editor said, they're suing us. Do you have any proof? I said, yes, I have my ex-girlfriend who's well known in town. She's a PR person. And I've got his card on my desk. Go there, let him go in, take the card. They said they're investigating that you made this up live. So it was a big, obviously you knew about it because it's on the internet forever. And they did sue. I don't know that they're exactly, but it is a big money item. On Thursday, they publicly announced that they were backing out of a lawsuit. They found the guy and he admitted it. And they found out doing they probably hired really expensive lawyers and investigators. They found out everybody was calling, and people were calling me saying they knew people who worked at Invesco that called it by this other name and diaphragm, because I was told it looked like a diaphragm if you were in a helicopter. I thought it looked like a spaceship myself. I wouldn't have come up with that then. So anyway, it became a rather famous national story, and they backed out and ended their lawsuit, and I saved my job. I think I saved my job. if it had been anybody that maybe I didn't know, or my ex-girlfriend, maybe they wouldn't have stood up for me. But I also had the card, which was pretty good proof. You know, that was like a Perry Mason moment where there's the card, there's the guy, we know the name. So stories. It was like what I said about the Super Bowl. I think that when everybody else was interviewing players and me going to try out for Jeopardy. So my belief about trying out for Jeopardy is maybe they'll maybe have a sports subject that I do good. If I studied the Bible, which I did as a Southern Baptist, it turned out that I became a question on Jeopardy. That's kind of one of my problems. It's about this journalist is on a show called Around the Horn. I think the subject must have been born or something. And my daughter and I were at a movie, a Marvel movie, I think, and everybody was calling me saying, "You're on Jeopardy tonight." They talked to me about being on as a celebrity, you know. And gee, I couldn't get on as a as a regular guy. I just try to. And Rick Rowley, who became, I think, the premier sports writer in this country for a long time, I helped him get his early job, and we've had a lot of conversations about it. We both feel the same way. The bigger the event, the smaller you make the story. So if you're at the Super Bowl, find the small story. If you're at a high school track meet, turn that into a big story. And that's advice I give to young people who are journalists or studying that in colleges, that everybody covers the Super Bowl as a big story. Find a small story. And if you're going to, I talked to a girl who threw the discus at the state high school meet, and people go, "Why do you go to the state high school track meet? They have the greatest hamburgers there." And I'd go every year because the hamburgers were like 50, you know, it was parents making hamburgers. And I thought, gee, I like their hamburgers. I'll go there and I'll find the column. That's true. That's the true story there. I talked to a girl who was a discus thrower, and she had just set the state record, and she was going to get a plaque or trophy. Her school had gone out of business. They'd closed her school. The track meet was after the school had closed. She couldn't take the statue back to her school and put it in the trophy case. She couldn't even go back and have a celebration with everybody. It was a small town in Colorado. And I made that into the biggest story I possibly could. I thought, what a great big story. And so I think it makes sense to go to state high school track meets because the burgers are better than anywhere else. And when you go to the Super Bowl, find the smallest story. That might be, a coach that is 96 years old. That when the Broncos played and won the Super Bowl, no. When the Broncos played when they won Super Bowl 50, I went and found John Ralston, who'd been their coach in a retirement home, and he had Alzheimer's. And I talked to him about, he was only like 10 miles away from the stadium where the Broncos won the Super Bowl. And nobody thought to maybe go find John Ralston. And I didn't know he was that he had Alzheimer's or that he was in a retirement place. I found out where he lived, and I went there, and his wife answered the door, and I told her that, I'd like to talk to John, who had been coach at Stanford. He won the Rose Bowl. He actually made the Broncos into a competitive team, their first winning record. And she said, he's not here, and he lives in his home now. And I went, I asked him, I said, can I talk to John Ralston? Sure, he's having lunch. And I went into his room, and he could answer improving. But I think that's my, I'm not a personality, I'm not a talent, but I think I'm creative. You guys have reached out to me. That doesn't make you anything, but you reached out to people that you want to have on your podcast. And you'll find, as you have, that people will do your podcast and you'll become famous. And somebody will say, why'd you become famous? Because we're willing to reach out to people and say, come on our podcast. We turned that into a YouTube channel. We turned that into a network. We turned that into the best sports network. That's how it works. Bob Knight was telling me that you create your own luck. Because I'd say, yeah, he won national championship. He won what, 3, I think. And I said, did you feel like you got lucky? You create your own luck. He said, everybody talks about luck plus skill. No. Luck is not something you find on the street. Luck is something you create. So, boy, I've given you too much. Ask me something that'd be funny.
All right, Woody, what sporting stadiums have the best food?
Dodger Dog. Now, they have changed companies, but I would fly to Los Angeles just to have it's funny you brought that up because this week I looked. There's a new company making they got rid of Farmer John's or Farmer Jim's or whoever's been doing it for like 70 years. And they got a new company. And I went, really? It's not going to be able to taste like the regular Dodgy Dog. Wonder if I can get Farmer John. I think that's what it's company with the old, it sold the old one. If I call him and say, would you sing me some Dodger Dogs? And I haven't been able to really find him yet. The thing about the hamburger at the track meet, I went and found the box that the hamburger meat came in, and I called that company because I thought, I don't need to go to the track meet. I can make these hamburgers myself. They would not sell them to me by the gross. That's the way they sell them kids sports events. And I said, but I'm Woody Paige. I don't play the Woody Paige card, but I played it that day. I said, I'm Woody Paige. You know, I'm on ESPN and stuff. Can't you? I'll say, I'll pay $150 for a dozen hamburgers because I wanted to see if I could do it. Best Baltimore barbecue, Albion, right field fence. The sandwich in Pittsburgh from the deli that named their sandwich after the quarterback. It has fries and coleslaw on it, and
Roethlisberger.
yeah. I when I go to, I've been to when I go to cities, I go to, there's a place in San Francisco that's called the Stinking Rose. It has the greatest garlic fries in the world. The garlic fries at San Francisco and Oakland. Oakland actually has, as bad a stadium as that is, they have better garlic fries. Whole stadium smells like garlic fries, and you could smell them because there's only like 8 people going to the A's game. So you don't have to stand in line or anything. So that shows you something about me, that when the season comes around and the Broncos schedule comes out, I go, oh, gee, I'm going to Baltimore. I'll have crab cakes. I'm going to New England. I'll have clam chowder. I'm going to New York. I'll go down to, when I lived there, I used to hang out at a place in Little Italy. I go there it was a place where, in The Godfather, where the knife stabs one of the bad guys at the bar.
Mulberry Street Bar. My dad lives down there. I know that place really well.
Yeah, I go there and sit at the bar, and I love the Italian bread that's got meat inside of it. So that's what I think about when I go to New York. Buffalo, I go to the Anchor Bar. They have, isn't that interesting stuff? So yes, I'm familiar with every stadium and the food in it. And there are a lot of new stadiums lately, but I've been to every NFL stadium, most of the baseball stadiums, and most of the basketball arenas. I have not been to the new Warriors place since they moved to San Francisco. And then each one of them I would try. There was a New York writer, very famous, Paul Zimmerman, and he played at Hofstra. He was an offensive lineman. He became Dr. Z, and he was in Sports Illustrated and was considered the ultimate. And he was on the Hall of Fame committee with me, and he would sit next to me. We would go to the Senior Bowl, and he was showing me his folder where he kept every national anthem that he ever heard, who sang it, and how long it was. And he had the shortest, the longest, the best, the worst, and he never wrote it. And he'd show me that book, and it was like his Bible that he throughout his career. So he does that. I go to Philadelphia and go, oh, do I go to Pat's cheesesteak or do I the one across the street? So that's terrible. That's I could, you know, that's terrible. I'll tell you, I met a guy. You guys are Joe. Are you in the New York area too?
Yes.
When I was a kid, I was a Yankees fan and a Cardinals fan, and I collected baseball cards. And there were 16 teams in baseball. I knew every player on every team. Boy, that's not much. I was 10, 11. When 10 years ago or something, I go to Florida. A friend takes me to a lunch meeting in Sertoma's Club or something. I'm not a speaker. I'm just going with my buddy. And he says, we got this guy over here who played Major League Baseball. Let me introduce you to him. He thought I assumed that I belonged to meet all baseball players. And his name was, he said, he's a dentist. And his name is Dr. Wise. And so he introduced me. I could tell Dr. Wise had no interest in me whatsoever. He said, Woody's written for Sports Illustrated and he's kind of been on TV and stuff. And I could tell he had no interest. And I said, Casey Wise? And he said, yes. And I said, switch hitter, 267, lifetime average. Cleveland Indians, played for the Milwaukee Braves, backup second baseman, a utility infielder. You went to Florida State to become a dentist. And I went on and he sat down in the chair. He was walking by, sat down in the chair and he said, what? And he turned to all these guys and he said, what the hell is this? How'd you set him up? And they said, we don't know him. He just came up out of nowhere. And I said, Casey White. So, switch hitter. And you were born in 1937 and you played in 2 World Series against the Yankees. And I said, and here are the starters for the Milwaukee Braves. Joe Adcock, who brother Frank Adcock was one of the 2 first basemen. Second base was Red Shandy. Shortstop was Felix Mantilla. Third base, Eddie Matthews, an MVP, Hall of Famer. Catchers, Dale Rice and Dale Crandall, Warren Spahn, Lou Burdett, and the first Little League player to ever make it to the major leagues, Joe Gay. And Casey Wise said, I've never heard anything like that. How do you know that? And I said, it's kind of what I do. I said, I memorized all the players in 1956. I was 10 years old. And he said, that's the most incredible. And I said, my daughter could use a dentist to see her. So that's worthless. How's that for worthless information? It's like what you said about the most wins. I won this week on Around the Horn, and I said, how many wins is that? And I thought the producer said 666. And I went, well, that's not good. It's the sign of the devil. And he said, no, 656. And so that's how I know, because I don't really pick. I think if I Google the show, they might have it on there. But it's fun. I haven't really talked much about it, but Tony, there is no plot of who's going to win the show. You don't know until the moment arrives. And I've won many times not knowing what I'm going to say at the end of the show. And I even did a show where I won and I said, I don't have anything. And so for 30 seconds, I just sat there and stared at the thing, at the camera. And they said, that's the worst 30 seconds of all time. And I said, yes, and I can't ever repeat it. That's a one time only. That's a walk off. I like, the show has become very diverse, which I think is fantastic. We have as many women as we do. I think there's like 21 or 22 now people. I did every show every day for like 15, 16 years. And I said, I need to back off this. And so I do 1 or 2 a week, and I have a contract for, I don't know, maybe 100 shows. And I really think the women who have joined the show over the years have added to the presence. We have we've added many African Americans. We have gay panelists. We have married panelists. We have Asian American. People have become big stars. Nina Kynes has become a big star as a result of being on Around the Horn. Sarah Spain. It's become, it's evolved for the good. It started as four old white men. I wasn't old then. I guess I was. So maybe 53 or something. But, and I'm not the oldest. Bob Ryan still does the show, and his wife and I were born on the same day. Bob's about 2 months older than me. So I always tell him he's the older statesman. But it's evolved from when you were seeing it. I don't know how old you guys are, but it was evolving when you first started watching it. I thought it was the same kind of show I would have watched when I was a kid. I watched the original Batman. We'd watch that once a week in my fraternity house in college. I watched the Soupy Sales show, and everybody out there, including you two guys, look up Soupy Sales. He was a great comedian who did an afternoon talk show nationally for kids, but it wasn't for kids. It was for adults. Kids didn't really understand the jokes that were behind the jokes. And I met him at a club years later. I mean, many years later, told him that I was actually doing him on Around the Horn. My personality on Around the Horn is a combination of Soupy Sales and Dan Reeves, who is a Hall of Fame type coached the Giants. And Dan Reeves used to rip on media, and he'd come out and say, "Why do I have to always straighten you guys out? You don't know what you're talking about." So when I got on the air, I was doing Soupy Sales, which was a little goofy, and I was doing Dan Reeves going, "Jay Mariotti, you don't know what you're talking about." And I used that line this week. We were talking about the NBA playoffs, and I said to the other three panelists, "Why do I have to always straighten you guys out?" And that was my salute to the late Dan Reeves. And nobody knew. I mean, I'll say on the show, you have to look at the schedule. And that's how on the Google site, you'll see Woody Paige says you look at the schedule all the time. That's a running gag that I don't ever look at the schedule. I don't know what the schedule is, but the researcher might tell me the schedule in my ear because the producer talks to me all the time. And it's usually, I won't make him loud and stuff, but he'll say, "You're killing me, Woody." And he puts an F word in there. And that's what, if you see me smiling, it's because the producer is saying I'm talking too long, or shut up, or get on with it, or whatever. And so you're looking at the panelists on Around the Horn, and we have these expressions, and they're probably based on the researcher saying in my head, that the Jets are opening against the Giants, and then they're playing Philadelphia, and I go, "The Jets are opening against," and I seem like I'm smart when I'm actually, it's being said into my ear.
So you talked about making your own luck before. So we've had a previous guest on this podcast where I think that's a really great story, and that we can actually trade stories. So I'm trying to make it as concise as we can. Once upon a time, last year, Nick and we had Scott Hamilton on the podcast with us. Now, Scott Hamilton, as you know, Olympic gold medalist, you have your own story with him as well. But our story is that we had him on, and then a couple of days later, there was this big wrestling event, the WWE event, their big stadium show was SummerSlam. That was at Nissan Stadium where the Titans play in Nashville. So we had Scott on that Thursday, and before the podcast started, Nick was picking his brain and found out that he goes to hockey games there, to Predators games, and the wrestling came up. And Nick was like, "Oh, you should talk to him about, you wanting to go, blah, blah, blah." Little did we know, Scott knows an employee who works for the company. That employee provided Scott with tickets. Within a matter of a day or so, Scott was texting me and he said, "Hey, I got you an extra ticket. I'm going with my son. We're sitting not far from the ring, which is right behind the commentary table." And I ended up being on a plane 48 hours later on Saturday morning because the event was Saturday that night. And that was the first time I ever went to Nashville. So without doing the podcast, we never would interview Scott Hamilton. Without Nick speaking to him and bringing it up, would never know that all of that was going to transpire how it did. So talk about creating your own luck. Nick and I don't think it goes over our heads. We create our own luck here, and we've had a lot of really amazing experiences. So we know that you, after Scott won those gold medals at the Olympics, you flew back with him. So talk to us what that experience was like, meeting him in person, and let's trade stories here.
He trained in Colorado. He didn't grow up here, but he trained in Colorado because the Olympic Center is here. And the Broadmoor, which is a famous ring for national championships for both men and women, Dorothy Hamill training. There are so many skaters. Now, plus you want to train at altitude before you go to the Olympics because of the altitude will help you, particularly when the Olympics were in Mexico City. Anyway, I knew him in passing. I go to Sarajevo, which is there's a bunch of Yugoslavia no longer exists. Sarajevo, all of the Olympic venues were destroyed, and he won the gold medal. And here's the luck that comes in. And you make your own luck, but it does happen that you get on the plane, and I actually had a contract in that I could fly first class, which was rare for a sports writer. But if you look at my history, I was in a newspaper award, moved from one newspaper on one street to another newspaper on another street. And part of my deal was I said, I want to fly first class. And they made an agreement with me. This is about making your own luck. I always wanted to fly first class. And I said, I do a lot of columns on the airplane, and I feel like I could write better if I'm in first class. And so they made me agree to put it in the contract that if I was writing a column, I could fly that flight on first class. Well, I opened my computer on every flight I was ever on, and I'd write like 2 paragraphs. Yeah, I close it, and then I would drink. I don't drink, and so I was flying first class because that was part of my deal. And coming on the plane with Scott Hamilton, and I went, "Hi, Scott," and he knew me well enough to say hello. And he said, "Oh, pardon me, Woody, I'm sitting in the first class seat next to you." And so he just won the gold medal. And so we sat next to each other, and his agent sat behind us. And I said, "Do you want me to change places with your agent so you can sit next to him?" He said, "I see him all the time. You and I talk. I want to know about writing, and I assume you want to know about the gold medal." And so we spent, 10 hours or something talking about stuff. So when I got back, I had a better story than I did at the venue when he won. And I had a story nobody else had because nobody spent 10 hours with him at that point. And I went, how lucky is that? And so it's across, and he was living in Denver. So it was across the front page. And I went, gee, that's the Julius Erving story, all over Denver. If you just make an effort at it, things tend to happen in luck. But I was a young sports reporter in Memphis, and the outdoors editor covered wrestling. And I grew up in the South. You grow up as a fan of wrestling and stock car racing and college football. That's your whole life. And I assumed that'd be what I've covered when I was doing sports. College football, SEC, and I did cover stock car racing. I didn't feel like I'd cover wrestling because And we all know, for those of you who don't, it's fixed. Fixed is not the right word. It's scripted. How about that? We'll go with scripted. And I loved it when I was a kid. And I became great friends with Bobby the Brain Heenan. Joe, you must have heard of him. The late Bobby.
Of course.
Tell you good. Forget everything else I'm doing. I'll tell you. So Bobby the Brain was the tag team champion. They were in Denver. I got to know him, and his partner was a guy who played the defensive end at Oklahoma until his knee and became a wrestler. And I was going to go out to dinner with him after a wrestling match in downtown Denver. And they wrestled against each other that night. And the one guy threw Bobby the Brain out of the ring, and a guy stood up with his aluminum chair in the crowd and whacked Bobby the Brain over the head and just burst his forehead. He had those vessels that you blood capsules. So he already had fake blood on his forehead. Now he's got a cut. It's just wide open. And the cops carried the guy away. After it's over, I go back, and the two of them are smoking cigarettes. And Bobby says, I got to go to the hospital. He said, I've never been hurt this bad in the ring. And they're looking at it and said, I got to go get 15 stitches. Damn it. And he's just cursing. And they bring in the guy who hit him over the head, got him handcuffed. They put him up against a concrete wall with the handcuffs, and Bobby Brain goes over, what the? And he's screaming at the guy, and he goes to hit the guy, and the guy ducks, and Bobby the Brain hits the concrete and breaks his hand. And he said, get me out of here before I kill myself. So he goes to the hospital. The other wrestler and I go to the hospital and meet him, and we're going to go to dinner. And I'm walking down the street with Bobby the Brain now. So, what are you going to do with this story? He said, I hope I become an announcer, which he did. He became a famous wrestling announcer. And he said, and I was up in Breckenridge today buying some condos. I'm going to own some condos in the mountains in the ski area here. And as he's telling me the story, a kid comes up, like 8 or 9 years old, and says, Mr. Brain, would you give me an autograph? And he takes it out of the kid's hand, the piece of paper, and he tears up the piece of paper and spits at the kid. Get out of here, kid. And we go up. So he said, so I've got these 5 condos, and I'm thinking if I can then make it. Oh, wait. Bobby, a kid just asked you for your autograph, and you spit on him. What was that all about? He said, if I'd have given him that autograph, he'd have lost it tomorrow. When he's 40 years old, he'll remember the night Bobby the Brain spit on him. And it actually made sense in that weird kind of way. And I loved being around wrestlers. And when I was a kid, when I was a young reporter, the outdoors editor covered wrestling. Memphis, it was important. And he came to me and said, you want to earn some money, kid? And I said, sure, yeah. Cover wrestling while I'm on vacation. And I said, oh, really? Good, I get to cover it. He said, what that involves is they'll send you the schedule. And I said, okay. And on the schedule, below the schedule will be the results and the times and how they won the match. So you write on for Saturday on the matches coming up, and then you write the results. And I said, but they don't wrestle till Monday night. Turn it in at the same time you turn. So I wrote 2 stories a week. I write the schedule, the results before they fought, before they had the wrestling matches. And so I made $20. And I thought, if I could just get somebody to have gambling or wrestling and call them and say, I bet this happens and this happens and this happens. And I took my daughter to see one of this period of time where the most famous wrestler was always said, oh yeah, did the. So he was wrestling. I introduced him to my daughter, who's like 8 or 9 years old. And he looks at her, Yeah. It goes into his routine. She starts crying, and he puts his arm around her and he talks in a normal voice. And says, I'm sorry, Shannon. So I got a kick. It's wrestling is a part of my life too that goes somewhat unknown.
Woody, sports betting on wrestling, it seems to be coming soon. That's what Nick Khan's trying to do. But I mean, you grew up with Elvis, friends with Dr. J, Bobby the Brain Heenan, Macho Man. You're just pulling out all the names here. It's unbelievable.
Nick Khan was my agent.
Oh, so you along with Adnan Burke and all those other greats, Nick Khan's taking over. Nick Khan is gonna take over the new endeavor. He's gonna run UFC and WWE. That's my prediction.
That represented the Eagles, and he kind of concentrated on the Eagles. And he said, "I got a guy that works with me. I'll turn you over to him." And so Nick Khan negotiated a lot of contracts with ESPN for me. And then he said, I'm getting out of it. So I had to get somebody else, but he said, I'm getting out of it. And then the next time I actually see Nick Khan, I'm like, he's head of WWE. Well, that's a switch, but that made sense. These guys that are agents, yeah, the Los Angeles Lakers have an agent for people now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt's hired Brody Van Wagenen. That happens.
ESPN used to have us, really the reason why I got involved with ESPN, they called me one day and said, we're doing a show. They had a network, ESPN Classic. Do you remember that network?
Of course.
Yeah. And they had a show that was on ESPN Century. And they would do 30-minute shows on athletes. And they called me and they said, we're doing this show. This is before I was with them. This is talking about the luck kind of thing. We're going to do a show on John Elway, and we're going to do shows. And we'd like to, we'll pay you $250 if you come to this hotel room. The show is called ESPN Century, and it'll look like an office or an English manor kind of place. And you just tell us some stories, kind of like I'm doing with you right now. So I went into this hotel ball, and they had a crew there. And I thought I was going to be asked about 5 athletes. They asked me for about 100 athletes. They go, Ted Williams, tell us a story. And I go, not that old. Joe Montana. I tell a Joe Montana story. The Secretariat. So I'm not, I didn't know Secretariat personally. So I did like 6 hours of just telling stories about athletes. And they called me back about a month later and they said, we want you to do that again. I said, I ain't doing it for $250. I said, that was work. That was really work. So they gave me like $2,000. And this included people like Larry Brown, who used to coach the New York Knicks and every other team in the world. And then they called me and said, we're going to start this show called Around the Horn. And that's kind of, they liked that I was funny, and they liked that I actually had a history of knowing stuff. And that's kind of how that all started. They said, we're going to start the show, and we'd like for you to be, you're the first guy we're hiring. And so I met with them at the Super Bowl in Tampa Bay, where the most famous national anthem, Zimmerman would have told you that, most famous national anthem of all time was sung by late Debo Simmons. So that's kind of all right, because I was available. I actually, I'm sure I've used the blackboard, but at this point, I don't know whether the quotes, I'll go, that seems familiar. I must be stealing them. I'm stealing them from myself. I am not recycling anything.
The best ability is availability. And that's,
my best ability is available. So
with ESPN though, I mean, basically the way the origin story goes, kind of like, part of the interruption came along as a based off Mike and the Mad Dog. Then you guys came Around the Horn as the follow-up show. But I think you kind of revolutionized the programming of ESPN now. When you went to the mornings, you were doing, Cold Pizza, First and 10 with Jay Crawford and Skip Bayless, which led to First Take. So how much of Skip and Stephen A's success do they owe to you?
Stephen A was around. He actually got fired right after we were working together. management team at that time didn't much like it. He did a nighttime show that was kind of a David Letterman kind of show. I went on it. It was in Times Square, and his contract ran out, and they didn't renew it. And he was, doing local radio programming in New York, and they brought him back to ESPN. In terms of, I hadn't thought, that's a good question. I haven't thought. I don't think I had any effect on ESPN on Stephen A. Smith. I think I was a good counter argument to Skip Bayless, because I promise you, all the grief he gets, he's serious. He's not making up that he hates LeBron. He's the most serious person I've ever been around in my life. He at that time we were doing cold pizza, he would drink like 14 Red Bulls during the show. I would talk to people. We had a little studio audience in the New York hotel. I talked to people in the office, and he would go back to his room and he'd study a yellow legal pad and add to it. And he'd get pissed at me all the time because he'd have a list of 10 things to get into a subject. And I had a little card, and I'd have one word on it, Mets, the trap. And he'd have 10 things. And we'd finish the segment, and he'd say, I didn't get to all my 10. I said, I didn't even get to do my one. What are you talking about? And so it was not a great relationship. But I think that show, he wouldn't have been on that show without. I mean, if I'd had my way, but when we did the audition together, it did work because we were opposites. And the show did work because, and they thought so much of it, they repackaged it all day long and put it in, First and 10, and then it was called two, and they take segments out of it and put it. We were on like 3-4 times a day. That's why I thought, boy, I was overexposed on TV, like on all the time. And as soon as I finished cold pizza, I had to work on Around the Horn, and I had to come up with different arguments for the same subjects, because that's all you're doing is you're repackaging. It's sort of like the most beloved, I think, sports show is the NBA show on TNT with Charles Barkley, because of Barkley and Shaquille. And they're repackaging stuff all the time. They have to repackage, at halftime and afterwards. That's what a lot of sports broadcast, you're repackaging it. And the idea is to come up with, because Mina Kimes, for instance, was on with Levitard. She was on NFL Today or whatever. She has to discuss the same subjects 3 times. So you got to be able to show, I may not be any good, but I can repackage stuff and come from a different direction with it. That's important when you are doing your podcast and you got somebody on the show. You've got to repackage whatever you might have asked the previous guy. You might want to ask the same subject about wrestling, but you better come up at the people are going to go, that's the same question he asked the guy the week before. You have to come up with a different angle all the time. It's sort of like in basketball. You got to create a new lane. You got to create a new lane and a new angle to come in from. So they achieved whatever they achieved.
All right. Well, we'll say it. We'll say it for you. We think Skip owes a lot too. My favorite First Take episode was the height of Tebow mania. They came out to Denver. You were on the show. That was a big surprise. You guys kind of you looked like you were. He was happy to see you, but I guess that was all just smoke and mirrors.
He says he's been in magazine articles because he's certainly become richer and more famous than me. I once said to my daughter, who's an adult and very successful, I said, if I'd have stayed with Skip, I'd be making $15 million a year and we'd be on Fox. And she said, no, one of you would have killed the other one. My daughter's actually smarter than I am. And that's right. It wouldn't have lasted because we would have, you always wonder how the Beatles broke up. I'm not comparing us to the Beatles, but you wonder, how could John and Paul, it happens all the time. There are people on television, on ESPN, that hate each other and and they work together. It wouldn't have, it wouldn't, I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to go to Connecticut. They were moving the show to Connecticut. And that's brilliant. And I quit. And that I didn't buy in. My contract was for New York. And when they moved it to Bristol, I went, I'm not doing that. And then my contract was up and they were, and so we agreed that I'd continue to do Around the Horn and I'd come back to Denver. But Skip went and he lived in a hotel for years in a Marriott, and he'd go to New York on the weekend. We never came to blows except that one time, but I think that show worked for that time period and that time. And then it worked with the two of them together, Stephen A. Smith and Skip. And they like each other. They really like each other. But I can tell you, they're both bullshit artists. So I guess I'll put myself in that class too.
Well, in order for TV to work, there needs to be a certain dynamic, right? And there needs to be friction. So going back to what you were saying at the beginning, we'll say your relationship with Jay Mariotti, and again, Nick mentioned this before too. We've had Jay on a couple of times with us. He's always treated us really, really well. But major reason why I think Around the Horn lasted so long in those initial early years is because you and Jay and the dynamic that you guys had, which evidently, based on what you were saying before, didn't start out great, but got a little bit better over time. That's ultimately why I think the show worked through those first couple of years. And you're not totally unfamiliar to podcasts, right? You did the Unmuted podcast with Jay there for a period of time. So
yeah, not very long. Not very long, to be honest with you. That relationship, I'm not talking about a love relationship, couldn't be reenacted. It couldn't come back. Jay had gone off in a totally different world. That's not a negative. He'd gone off in a totally different world. I'd gone into a different direction. And even though it was my idea, and I kind of wanted to bring his career back, I don't know any other way to put it, because he was kind of on the shelf, or still is to an extent. And I was trying to help him, and it didn't work. Yeah, I interrupted your question.
No, it's never all going to work. So I also wanted to ask you about the craziest things. Now, you've pitched a lot of spooky stories, always looking at the angle that nobody has ever looked at previously, and that has helped your career immensely. But what are some of the other notable crazy stories that you've got to work on and research for and do through the years?
Well, one thing about that before I answer that is, we started the show with a really serious, solemn kind of story about me going out to fresh kills where they took all of the fresh kills, if you will. And I always wondered why you'd name a dump fresh kills. That didn't, I assume it had something to do with birds or something. But a lot of people at the Denver Post got very upset that the Denver Post sent me to New York. Their feeling was, you're taking this sports writer who writes funny and you're sending him to, well, I'd cover civil rights and the assassination of Dr. King in the South. I went on peace marches as a reporter. And I covered Columbine, which was the most famous first of the school killings. Covered the Columbine, the Aurora shootings over here. I consider myself a serious journalist. I wanted to be Mike Royko out of Chicago. There have been famous columnists in New York City that that I kind of patterned what I wanted to be like. I wanted to be like Jim Murray, the sports writer, sports columnist, Red Smith, and I had a Kurt Vonnegut, and you're talking about. I got to know Kurt Vonnegut toward the end of his life, and Kurt Vonnegut was my idol. If you were to read my writing, you'll see that I'm basically I'm a Kurt Vonnegut cover band. I think it's a good way to put it, is that I thought he was the greatest American author of all. So I think that influenced me so much, but I was a serious journalist. I mean, when I went to cover 9/11, I didn't do plenty of blackboards. You can go back, anybody can go back and look at the stories I did out of New York at 9/11. But I think that's what kept me. I'm 70. How old am I? I'm 76. What? I think that my phone is answering how old I am.
He's listening.
If I ever want to impress anybody, I go on and say, I can't say it very loud because I'll say to Amazon, do you know who Woody Paige is? It gets my bio, and people go, really? Alexa knows that? That's my idea of a bad joke at a party. I've told you some of the crazy stuff, but I flew with the Blue Angels, and I actually flew the plane for a while, and I threw up all over the cockpit and thought I was going to die. That was kind of a crazy thing. When the Olympics were, I'll give you one that actually was copied by, I think, 20 guys. In Australia, I decided during the Olympics in Australia, I wanted to go to the Outback. And so I found a travel agent that worked with the Olympic Committee that found me 2 flights to get to the Outback, out in the middle of nowhere. Went out there, rented a car, asked where I could go to where they made the Mad Max movies. Did you ever see the Mad Max movies? And I said, I want to go there. I went out and said, is there a bar out there? And they're like, yeah, it's about 150 miles or something. So I'm in the middle of Australia, away from the Olympics. I get to a bar that's nowhere. I mean, it is, and that's where, if you see the original Mad Max movie, particularly the second one, they have a trucks racing, and there's an all. That was right where I was, and I said to the bar people, where can I find kangaroos? Well, the ranger's right down the road here. Went to the ranger, make short story. I said, where are kangaroos? They come out at dusk, right over at that hill. Here's a loaf of bread. Go over there, stand on the hill. The kangaroos will come and you feed them with the bread. I went, that sounds simple. So when I stood on the hill, I had the bread. At dusk, there's like 1,000 kangaroos coming from all directions. This is like out of a novel out of the Boer War or something. And they surround me, and they're big reds, and they're the female kangaroos with babies in their pouches and stuff. They're surrounding me. And I'm throwing bread, and I'm backing toward the car, which is about 100 yards away. And I'm backing. I said, I'm going to die. This is like the birds. This is how Hitchcock movie. I run, and I'm throwing the bread. And I get in the car, and they're jumping on the car. And I think they're going to break the windshield and everything. The ranger had told me, I thought the ranger was there to protect the kangaroos. His job was to kill kangaroos. And he killed 68 that day, he told me later. You think of a ranger in this country, a ranger is protecting the forest. He's protecting the bears. He's not going out shooting bears. That's what I thought they would do. And kangaroos are rats, So I go back to the ranger station and I said, and he's laughing. He is laughing his ass off. And he said, do you see kangaroos? I said, you're a dick. I said, you knew that why didn't you give me 3 loaves of bread or something, or tell me that there was going to be hundreds, not 5? And he said, you need to find out for yourself. And so in that bar, go back to the bar, and I watch the Olympics, and the TV set is black and white up in the corner, and it's about 14 inches. And I'm watching, I've been sent to the Olympics to cover the Olympics. I am in a town called Broken Wheel, the Broken Spoke or something. In a bar, there's 3 of us in the bar, looking at it on a black and white TV that's 14 inches, covering the Olympics and writing about kangaroos. Is that a guy called me? I had a cell phone that you could call from anywhere. I rented it, and the phone rang, and I went, "Who's calling me?" It was my best friend in Colorado, and he said, "So what event are you at? The track and field? Are you at the basketball?" I said, "I'm in a bar in the Outback. I just was surrounded by a couple hundred kangaroos." And he said, "No, really, where are you? Are you, there's a great meet tonight, and nobody would believe that I was down under. I mean, way down under. I was probably 2,000 miles away from the Olympics. And so I'll tell you, the other one is I try to pick out something different every day. And I was one of only probably 20 sports writers that covered the greatest Olympic wrestler of all time. He was Cuban. He'd never lost a match. He'd never lost a point in a match. And he went up against an American who was a kid. And it was the greatest singular upset in the history of the Olympics. And I looked around and I thought, nobody else is here. He gave me, this is the biggest. I'm writing a book, and the title is I Wouldn't Believe This Shit Either. Because you guys are going to say, I don't believe that shit that he said. I got a one-on-one interview with a guy just pulled off the biggest upset in Olympic history against the greatest Olympic wrestler who had never, not only never lost, never allowed a point in these deals. And I went back to Olympic headquarters, and we had other people because Denver has the Olympic Center here. We had 5 people at the Olympics, and this guy called me and he said, "I'm going to cover that. I'm going to cover the wrestling thing. I'm going to do a story. I'm going to try and find the." I said, "I was there. I think I can do it." And he said, "No, that's my story. I cover wrestling." I said, I think I got that story. I said, "I was there." He said, "What were you doing there?" And I said, "I don't know. I had to go there." So those are a couple of. I mean, I always do stuff and say, "Why are you doing this?" Well, I'm now 76. The reason why I brought it, it's time to not do shit. It's time not do this shit. I mean, not. It's time to do that shit. My shit's okay. Got it. I'm not making any sense to you guys. Doing around the horn is okay.
Yes, keep doing it. We need you on there.
Is okay. Doing shit where I fly a jet airplane, that's it was either an F4 or F-16, A4. A4 is an A4. That's not a good idea in my age.
Well, I think the kangaroo story is surreal, and that book sounds incredible. Joe, read that in one sitting. But look, this has been fantastic. Our last question here, our signature question: what in your life or your career has been your I'm right moment? So what I mean by that is a time or place where you wanted to pursue something, you asked somebody for advice, or maybe you were trying to persuade an editor. They said no, and you were like, you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. And ultimately, you will see why it is that I'm right.
I don't know that that's ever happened. They've never not. Okay, this is a good way to end the show. There was a period of time in this country where sports pages had a lot of advertising, and there would be breast enhancement ads on sports pages. I don't know why. They came out with penis enlargement. I wouldn't believe this shit. Came up with penis enlargement. And it was next to my column in Denver Post. And I thought, how does that work? I mean, we could kind of figure out what breast enhancement was. How do you? So I made an appointment at the doctor's office, and I was going to do it under a fake name, but I assumed they were going to ask me for the insurance. And I went, with it. And so when I went in, the doctor started explaining it to me that it requires injections of fat from your butt into your penis. You can cut this part of the show off if you want to. And it requires the penis can be enlarged length, and as he told me, the women like circumference. You're not believing. So he showed me pictures, examples, and he said, here's a good one for you. And I said, well, I kind of like this one. Does it come in a white? You asked about this, and I said, that one looks like he's wearing a Boy Scout cap. It was the weirdest. So he said, are you ready to do this? Because it required me flying to Houston. And no, let me think about it. That's what you do when you walk out of a store. Let me think about it. So I went back and I wrote a story. It was Christmas time. I wrote a column and I thought, for the man who has almost everything, here's a good Christmas gift. And I thought, the ad is right there next to me. So, I mean, I wasn't using language that you could put in the newspaper. And it was Christmas. I said, here's something you consider to get the man in your life better. I wrote a call about it. I got a call that night. I think it was Christmas Eve from the publisher of the paper saying, we can't put that. We're not putting that in the paper. That's not going in the paper. You put that ad in the paper. It's the only time in my 60 years or whatever, somebody said, we're not putting that in the paper. But along comes a new magazine in Denver that's a monthly magazine. Yeah, city magazine, like New York magazine, like every city has. That guy called me and he said, I can't afford you, but I'd love for you to write a story in our first magazine to help us get off the ground. And I kind of knew the guy, and I said, I got something. And he said, what? I said, how would you like a story of penis enlargement? And he said, what? And I said, I'll send it to you. He said, I can't pay you much. I said, you don't have to pay me anything. Just run it. He called me and said, we want to put you on the cover. See, the story gets good. You could find this if you want. What? What are you going to put me on the cover for? We're going to put you in a hot tub with two women. And they'll be holding a yardstick. And I went, okay. Just talk about doing crazy things. I went, yeah, sure, why not? So I did. There was a photo shoot. The magazine comes out, me on the cover, story in there. And I get a call from the publisher. This is maybe 6 or 8 months later. And he just, for me, I knew it. And I said, once you didn't run it, it was my property. You couldn't do that to me. You can't do that to me. I don't think to this day, and I still know him well, I think if we picked up the phone and you interviewed him and you said, what is the worst thing Woody Paige has done in his life? I got an answer for that. So that's the only time. So that kind of answers 3 or 4 questions about craziest thing you've ever done. I thought that was a good idea. That was an unusual idea. Nobody's ever written that. Oh, the one I did in Australia, though, I just want to tell you that after I went to the Outback and did that piece, every columnist from the United States copied that. They went out there. There were a bunch of guys that went out there. Somewhere in Australia, they went to either see kangaroos or go to where Mad Max movies is played. So that kind of showed me that some of those ideas could be unique and different. So anyway, yeah, that last one I told you about was unique. Yeah, you can find it if you actually. I think you can actually. That was late '80s. I think you could probably find that story if you want to read it. It's funny. It's funny as hell. It's a lot funnier in the magazine than it would have been in the newspaper. Guys,
Yep.
you've been great.
I'm gonna go look for it.
I think that's probably more than you want to ask about that. Did I ever get any advice? Yes. I went to a seminar when I was in high school to get away from school. I knew in the second grade I was going to be a writer. Don't ask me why. My family were all cotton plantation workers in Mississippi. And so I knew in high school. And I asked a sports writer at this seminar at the Commercial Appeal, which I eventually worked for, what's the best advice he could give me? And he said two. One, take a typing course. And two, don't get into journalism. And I always remember. And so I left and I went, that's my advice. So I was the only male student in the typing class. I had taught myself how to type, but not very well. I was the only, he was right about that. That was great. I got several dates because I was the only guy in the typing class. They were kind of stuck with me, and they knew I could type. That was kind of impressive to some of them. And the other thing is I didn't pay attention to it. I decided I was going to get into journalism, and I couldn't dream of television. I mean, I didn't think about television, and I didn't think about radio or certainly podcast or anything else. And I still think that's the most important aspect of our conversation today of people that are out there is that think of something that hasn't, who invented the podcast? We know it wasn't Al Gore. He invented the internet. Who invented the podcast? I don't know. Do you have any idea? I mean, who's the father of your podcast? I'd find that out if I were you. But I would maybe, if I were 22 and just kind of starting out this business again, I try to come up with something that hasn't been done before. I've done that once in my life. I like to play golf. I got two of my friends, one of them was an engineer, and I said, we need to come up with an invention that when you point this gun at the flagstick, it tells you how far away you are. And they went, oh, that's a good idea. And we came up with a yardage gun. And it wasn't high tech, but it would bounce off you'd have to have a special flag that it would have a limit. And we went to the PGA, which is in New Jersey. PGA's home office is in New Jersey. We went to the USGA, maybe that's one in New Jersey. They said, that will never be allowed in golf. I said, what about for recreational players? Maybe pros. Oh, no. We'll send out, if you put that out, we'll send out messages to all the country clubs all over the country that's a legal aid. Well, guess what? One of the biggest things in golf is the yardage. That was my chance to be somebody. So instead of that, I end up on your fucking podcast.
Well, it's a good consolation prize. The money's not here. We're not paying you like Chris Russo gets paid $100,000 for our first take episode, but we've appreciated the time, Woody. And
thanks for reaching out to me, Nick, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Joe. And thank you for putting me on. You'll go away from them and go, boy, that was a wild ass guy.
It was a joy. And next time you're doing a Broncos game in New Jersey, we'll have to get together and meet up. And maybe you can go visit that famous mobster place.
Yeah, let me end on that. That's funny. So I'm at the Jets. The Broncos played the Jets like 3 years ago, and after the game, I'm going to go into Little to go to the restaurant that I like. And the Yankees were playing. If you go back and look at it, Yankees were playing in the playoffs then. So it's 3-4 years ago. After the game out there, I'm going to get an Uber, and nobody picked me up. I can't get a cab. I can't get anything. I'm in the empty stadium out in nowhere, and a golf cart comes over, and there's 5 guys on this golf cart, and they start screaming, "Hey, Paige, Woody Paige!" And they said, "We work for the Jets, and we're supposed to go around and make sure everything is can we take you somewhere?" I said, "Take me somewhere where I can would you take me somewhere where I can get a ride back to New York?" And they said, "Oh, we'll give you a ride back in New York." So we went and got in their car, and they were saying, "Oh, Woody Paige is in their car and everything." And I said, "Well, thank you." And it's up to I'm going to Little Lily. And so we all rode together. And I'm getting out of the car, and they said, "You're not at all like you are on TV. We could barely hear you. You didn't scream and holler." I said, "Don't tell anybody my secret that I don't scream and holler." And they said, "Wow, this is the greatest day until the she rode in the car." So that's next time I will ride with the two of you out to the stadium.
Perfect. Looking forward to it. So that's going to do it here for this amazing episode of You Know I'm Right, for the often imitated, never duplicated, our special guest, Woody Paige, my co-host, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know. All right.